running very prominently across this sector. And across the Chenab River, we had very little troops. And we were not expecting a full-fledged attack. So initially they managed to make headway and they could reach up to Chenab River or short of it. And as a result, on 1st September, India actually took this as an act of war. And we started our air action, we launched our air force and we launched our regular army across Chenab to stop this. And also, the next action that we took was, because Pakistanis had already come in at a considerable distance into Indian territory here, we said the best way to push them back is to hit them somewhere else and hit them where it hurts. So we launched on 5th of September. After this had been stopped halfway, but still they were holding this territory, we launched an operation towards Lahore. So in the Lahore area, there were 3 divisions. We went into Pakistan and we started threatening Lahore. With the result, one, they pulled back from the Cham sector. They had to defend Lahore. So they pulled back. And as a countermeasure, they launched their own offensive into our area in the Khem-Karan sector. Next, please. So we had gone in from there, they came in from below that. And they came in with their full armored division. And you may have heard the names of Khem-Karan and Asal Uttar. They were very, very famous tank battles which took place, and you must have heard of a phrase called the graveyard of Patton tanks. So this is where the Pakistanis were stopped in 3 days, and this graveyard of Patton was created where this technically and superior in armament, these heavy tanks, and Indian tanks were comparatively older and lighter armed, but yet our tanks and our brave infantry, they could stop them within 3 days. And as a counter, we launched our armored division into Sialkot. Next, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. So Sialkot lay between Jammu and Lahore and Amritsar. So we went in with our armored division into the Sialkot. So this ding-dong battle was on. They would come in from here, we would stop that, we would go in from somewhere else, they would stop that, they would come in from somewhere else. And by the time it was 22nd of September, and UN brokered a ceasefire which was agreed to by both sides, and thus on early morning of 23rd September, the war came to an end. And that is why the war is often called a stalemate. Because before a logical conclusion could be reached, it was called off. Like a logical conclusion was reached in the 1971 war where Pakistani army surrendered. They formally signed an instrument of surrender. Even in this case, if it had carried on for maybe another 15-20 days, we would have reached the same situation. However, it was called off. And can you have the last slide, please? Roughly, this was the situation at the end of the war. The areas shown in yellow here and in pink there were under our control of Pakistan, and that small red spot shown there, and what is not shown here is the Haji Pir Bulge that was also with us, which I showed you right in the beginning. So we had about 1600 square kilometers of territory with us, and they had about 400 square kilometers of our territory with them. So that was where the war ended. Now, you can please tell us, please. So my book covers some stories of during these 1.5 months, and one thing that I realized, or one thought that came to me while I was researching for this book and when I was writing the book, is that, well, the book is about heroes and I have written about the stories about the heroes, but what is it that makes these heroes different from all their other colleagues, the people who were there with them? What made these people different? Were they more courageous? Were they more brave? Were they stronger? Were they mentally more robust? And, well, I came to the conclusion that heroism has 3 ingredients. First is to be at a particular place at a particular time, or a circumstance or a situation. Second is your reaction and your action to that situation. how you react to it, how do you subsequently act to it, what decisions you take at that point of time. And thirdly, the outcome of that, the significance on the outcome of your action or your reaction. These three ingredients would go into making a hero, along with courage, determination, bravery. I think all those who fought the war had those in ample measures. Yet, some of them were put into those circumstances, they took those decisions and they became heroes. So, let me start the reading by reading out the story of one such hero. Till the time he took this action, he was leading a very ordinary life like any other soldier. And so it's interesting that when you try and go back and research about these people, you find not much information available because they were like 800 other soldiers who were serving in the same unit. They were nondescript. But this act, and subsequently it propelled them to fame and glory. So let me read out one story of Sipahi Jarnail Singh. I have titled the story as Irrepressible. He belonged to the 2nd Sikh Regiment, or rather the 2nd Battalion of the Sikh Regiment. The soldiers of 2 Sikh took pride in the fact that just as they had proved themselves on the battlefield many times over their 200-year history, their sportsmen had also consistently won laurels for them during peacetime. One of the battalion's star sportsmen was Sipahi Jarnail Singh of Charlie Company. Not only was he the best basketball player in the battalion, but he also played for the services team. His 6 feet something body hid a simple soul who liked desi ghee, playing basketball, and who had never disobeyed an order in his life. Jarnail, like most soldiers of his battalion, had taken the war in his stride. He saw it as just another match with the enemy, which gave him the opportunity to do the best for his team, the company and the battalion. Always the first to volunteer to carry the heaviest of loads, Jarnail was also popular in the company for his melodious singing voice. But it was this very talent that was causing much distress to his platoon commander now. The company had moved at the head of the battalion column, marching towards its forward assembly area for the attack on Raja. Raja was one of the features in the Hajipir Bulge in the south. So while Major Ranjit Singh Dayal's forces came in from the north to capture the pass, this 2 Sikh was going in from the south to marry up with them and capture these features. So one of the features was Raja. Jarnail, in high spirits, had insisted on singing loudly throughout the long march. It may have been his elation at finally getting a chance to emulate all the heroes who formed the battalion folklore and prove himself in battle, or just plain high spirits. Whatever the reason, Jarnail just wouldn't stop singing, despite several warnings by his platoon commander and the company JCO, Subedar Gurcharan Singh. He would fall silent for a while when remonstrated, but soon afterwards, his singing could be heard in the silent night. The JCOs were rightly worried that his voice would carry far into the night, warning the enemy of their advance. When they reached the forward assembly area, with Jarnail subdued after many remonstrations but still humming below his breath, the 2 JCOs conferred on what could be done about him. They came to a consensus and approached the company commander, Captain Anup Dharni, with a recommendation that Jarnail should be left behind as a part of the guard at the assembly area itself and not taken forward for the attack. The company commander agreed, sharing their apprehension of premature discovery by the enemy if Jarnail broke into a song at the forming up place. Jarnail was crestfallen, but to him orders were orders. And even the thought of representing against them did not occur to him. He watched despondently as his comrades were soon on their way towards the forming up place, leaving Jarnail and the rest of the guard party behind. Jarnail was soon forgotten for the next couple of hours as Captain Dharni and the JCOs found themselves in the thick of battle for the capture of Raja. After the heavy fighting, when the enemy was finally routed, Captain Dharni was the first to reach the command bunker on the very top of Raja Feature, that was the enemy headquarters, only to find it deserted. Looking around at the several enemy dead bodies that lay strewn on the ground, he spotted the body of a Pakistani captain who had apparently been the commander of this post. Approaching the body cautiously, Captain Dharni found his enemy counterpart lying face down, still clutching his pistol in his hand. Gingerly turning the body around, he found a bullet wound on the Pakistani officer's chest. Looking around, Captain Dharni realized that the location of the command post was such that it could not have been fired upon by the attacking troops from the lower slopes. Had the Pakistani officer killed himself, or had someone reached the crescent before him? The crest before him, sorry. It was then that he spotted the olive green uniform on one of the bodies. So Pakistani had khaki uniform, he spotted an olive green uniform. In stark contrast with the khaki uniforms of the several Pakistani bodies that also lay scattered around. It was the body of the enthusiastic vocalist Jarnail Singh, who for all practical purposes was supposed to be guarding their equipment in the forward assembly area. Anup surmised that Jarnail, unhappy at being denied the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to prove himself in battle, had deserted his position in the forward assembly area. After Charlie Company left the FAA, Jarnail had probably quietly joined the column of Bravo Company which followed and fought through the objective along with them. He was apparently the first man to reach on top of the Raja Feature where the enemy headquarters was located. Whether this was by chance or Jarnail realized the importance of striking at the enemy command post, whether it was he who had killed the Pakistani captain or if the officer was already dead when Jarnail reached. These are some of the questions that could never be answered, but it was clear that Jarnail, probably for the first time in his life, had disobeyed orders. So Jarnail Singh did not qualify for any gallantry award. The story was told to me by someone who was in the battle, and I thought this story deserved to be included in the unsung heroes. So there were so many such people. I have come to believe that every man who fought that war was a potential hero. It is just that some met with those three ingredients or those three factors, the right combination of them, and they were propelled to heroism or herohood, and the others would remain unsung. The second factor that I would like to talk about is luck. You know, they say that fortune favors the brave. But I would say that each of the 4 lakh odd soldiers who fought that war were certainly brave. So Lady Luck would have been very hard pressed to look after each one of them. Some of them probably did not meet the kind of luck that they deserve. So how does one reconcile this with fortune favors the brave, but some of the braves don't get favored by fortune? I realized that it's not only the brave, but probably fortune certainly favors the audacious. While everyone is brave, certain people, the bravery is a little of a different degree. They are audacious and fortune favors them. And just to illustrate this point, I'd like to bring out 3 small stories. I'll just tell you about them. The first was of Major Ranjit Singh Dayal, whose film we just saw. He played a very critical role in the war because capture of Hajipir Pass was one of the turning points of the war. And it so happened that after he had captured the Hajipir Pass, there were certain other high mountains around the pass which had to be captured, because if the enemy was sitting on them, the pass could not remain in our hands for very long. And after the capture of the pass, the young major was sitting on a height and he was surveying the area around and he was looking at trying to make his attack plan. And one bullet came from nowhere and hit him. Now, it was his good fortune, it was Lady Luck smiling at him that he had his weapon, his carbine slung here. And the bullet came and hit the carbine instead of hitting him, and it ricocheted and it didn't do any damage to him. So it was good luck, it was fortune that he survived that and he managed to then complete his mission successfully. The other gentleman was a gentleman called Major Bhaskar Roy, who was the tank squadron commander in Cham. After the capture of Haji Pir Pass, if you recollect, I had told you that the Pakistanis had come in the Cham-Jauria sector with their tanks, and that was actually like the declaration of war. Now, I would like to, he had 14 tanks with him in Cham, and these tanks were AMX-30s, which were about 14 tons, and they were up against 6 squadrons, so that is 6 into 14, 6 times the number of Pakistani pattern tanks, which were 40 tons. They had a much heavier gun, they had a much thicker armor. So with this group of 14 tanks, he managed to stop them or delay them by one full day. If he had not done that, then on the first day itself, the Pakistani forces would have reached right up to Aknoor. And with that, actually what would have happened, the consequences would have been that the road, the Jammu-Srinagar road would have been threatened. Srinagar and the valley would have been cut off from the rest of India, and possibly the outcome of the war could have been a lot different. So I just want to read out a small portion of the story of Major Bhaskar Roy and how fortune favored him. The dapper young man in a perfectly tailored black dangri was sitting in the office of the brigade major of 191 Infantry Brigade at Jauria. They were spiritedly discussing his plan for defending the indefensible. The date was 31st August 1965, and the officer was Major Bhaskar Roy, the Charlie Squadron commander from 20th Lancers, whose squadron had been assigned to the brigade defending the Cham-Jauria sector. He shared a degree of bonhomie with the brigade major, Major S.K. Sen, as he belonged to the Armoured Corps 2, and the two had done the Defence Services Staff College course together. General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, former Chief of Army Staff, who was commanding the other squadron of 20th Lancers at that time, that was the Alpha. Bhaskar was 6 months my senior in Foxtrot Squadron at National Defence Academy. In fact, I joined the regiment just because he had. I remember him as an excellent athlete and a swimmer, with an equally good flair for writing and speaking. He came from a family of intellectuals and scientists and had studied at Doon School in Dehradun before joining the National Defence Academy. Fascinated by stories of great heroes of Indian epics and military leaders like Alexander and Napoleon from childhood, he chose to join the army instead of taking to science as his family had expected. But home and family were far from his mind today as he animatedly tried to put his point across. There was no dispute in both their minds that a Pakistani attack on their sector was imminent. Even the report from the United Nations observers had indicated a build-up of Pakistani tanks across the border. The point being debated was the direction it would come from. Their area of responsibility shared two different categories of borders with Pakistan: the international boundary and the ceasefire line. So far, all the infiltration had come in through the ceasefire line, as violating this was less serious business than a transgression across the international boundary, which was tantamount to open war. Major Bhaskar Roy was convinced that if Pakistan did take the decision to launch its armour into Indian territory, it would be an open act of war in any case. The terrain on either sides of the international boundary was better suited for tank movement and would be the logical choice for any enemy tank commander aiming to make a rapid advance into Indian territory. If I was the Pakistani army commander, I would have certainly taken this approach, he told his senior. Finishing his coffee, Major Bhaskar Roy bid Major Sen farewell and returned to his Scotland harbour. He had an uneasy feeling that the day of reckoning for his men and machines was not very far away. After reaching the Scotland harbour, he went around the tanks and spoke to his men. One of the tanks was being repaired and its engine had been removed. By when will it be done? He asked the mechanics working on it and was told that it would take another day or two. Urging the technicians and crew to speed up the work, he continued his way from tank to tank, chatting and joking with the crews. But it didn't take very long for Major Bhaskar Roy's premonition to come true. The day began very early the next morning, with the Pakistani artillery opening up with all guns blazing, literally. The Scotland harbour received its fair share of the Pakistani offerings from across the border. Fortunately, there wasn't any damage to the tanks or casualties to the men. Major Bhaskar Roy contacted the brigade headquarters and was told that the forward troops had reported enemy tank noises and movement from several different places. He asked for and got permission to deploy his tank troops as had been previously planned. The positions had been selected to cover enemy tank approaches from the international boundary as well as from the ceasefire line and were located astride the area where the two met. Major Bhaskar Roy's appreciation and instincts proved right, and the first enemy armoured assault came in the area of Burejal, Gusa. The enemy tanks crossing the international boundary with impunity. The Indian tank crews sat at their stations in the tanks, watching the monstrous Patton tanks approaching. Major Bhaskar counted the dust trails which indicated individual tank positions and estimated this to be one squadron. The squadron has 14 tanks. The crews, including Major Bhaskar, had read and heard about the mighty Patton tanks, pride of the Pakistani Armoured Corps. They had seen grainy, black and white pictures of these tanks during training, but to see the mythical beast in real life advancing towards them in all its menacing glory sent shivers of thrill mixed with fear down their spines. The M48 Patton tanks opposing them weighed 45 tons, sported a 90mm gun, and was protected by armour that was 120mm thick. The puny AMX-13 with them in comparison weighed a mere 13 tons, had a 75mm gun, and its armour was only 40mm. So it was, on the whole, it was about 1/3 the size and the potential of a Patton tank. Yet, at this critical juncture, the tank crews of Charlie Scotland put out all thoughts of inferiority out of their mind and focused on stopping the enemy tanks as best as they could. Hidden in their well-concealed positions, they held fire, allowing the enemy tanks to close into their own shorter effective range. Then, on the pre-arranged signal, which was the opening of fire by Major Bhaskar Roy's own tank, the AMXs let loose with all their might. Major Bhaskar may not have realized it then, but this was the very first tank versus tank engagement that the Army of Independent India had ever undertaken. Using classic armour tactics, the defending tanks fired at a selected enemy tank and quickly reversed to jockey into another firing position to engage another tank. In this way, they quickly destroyed 3 enemy tanks, 3 recoilless guns, and an ammunition vehicle, temporarily halting the enemy advance. In this encounter, now comes the part I was talking about. In this encounter, a shell from an enemy tank hit Major Bhaskar's tank, and a splinter ricocheted, striking him in the chest. Fortunately for him, a silver cigarette case presented by his father, which he was carrying in his breast pocket, stopped the splinter and saved his life. Possibly a rare instance where someone's life was saved due to the habit of smoking. The gunner of his tank was not as fortunate and was killed by another splinter. So, luck, fortune, favors the brave, favors the audacious. Major Bhaskar Roy continued to fight that war for the rest of the day. And they fired, they stopped the Pakistanis there, then they rushed back to another prepared position. And they waited for the Pakistanis to advance some more, and then they fired back at them again. So in this manner, they kept falling back, kept delaying the Pakistanis, so that the Indian forces had time to build up. The government got time to take a decision to use the Air Force. Had Major Bhaskar Roy not been lucky enough and had not been saved by that cigarette case, it is possible that the Pakistanis could have broken through within those first 5-6 hours and reached right up to our vital areas. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is all I had in my short book reading for you. The book has many more such interesting stories, and incidentally, the Hindi translation of this book is also available because we wanted it to be available to the soldiers of today so that they could also read about these heroes and emulate them. Any questions that you have about the war, about the book, I'll be happy to. Yes, ma'am.
Loud Punjabi.
I know, I can ask. Many of the insist on having a mic. Hello. So, thank you for the book. It is very, very interesting. I must say that your storytelling style is very engaging, and I really wish more and more of us come to know about these kind of books written by ex-servicemen like you. I think these are the kind of heroic stories we should all get to.
Well, ma'am, it's the age of social media. Please do spread the word around.
Yeah. And I think you should probably do it also in the social media. These small snippets, share them. I mean, it kind of inspires us and we look up
There
to
is the army itself is very active on social media. There is ADGPI, if you search for its Additional Director General Public Information. So they keep posting such.
Yeah, but do this as in. I'm just saying that you should be able to reach out to a larger. So, anyway, my question is, of course, coming from the space of some understanding of this whole thing, which is that, after all these heroic fights, which, heroic spaces which are created during war, and you started by saying that if it had gone on for another 15-20 days, things would have been very different. It would have been the 71 kind of a position. So, how was the morale of the army at the end of it when the decision was taken to kind of withdraw and retreat? What did all these heroes who had lost their friends and their colleagues, what did they feel? Did they feel let down? What happened emotionally? That was one I wanted to know. And and maybe a little bit of the history behind it, actually, really what happened to have made this decision happen. So that would really help. I'm kind of, I keep wondering as a citizen of this whole thing about Pak-occupied Kashmir and why we had kind of let go of this. So just if you could throw some light on that. Thanks.
To answer your first question, I'll just read out a small part from my prologue, which actually addresses this. This is from my prologue. The fiercest battles were fought over pieces of lands or hills, which, won over through blood and toil, were finally handed back after the war. It is fortunate that the soldier is not given to reflect on the importance of the land he is fighting for. For the soldier, it is an objective to be captured or defended. It is a task that is to be performed even at the cost of his life, for the izzat of the unit and the duty to the country, as well as for his own self-respect. In war, the soldier gets no reward but honor, that of the regiment, and if all he knows why he is fighting, it is only because of the tug of that invisible thread. So I really don't think that, fortunately we have an army in this country which is completely divorced from politics or any kind of, such ambitions also. So most of the soldiers did their job and they let the leaders and the politicians do their job. I'm sure there would be, I'll give you an example of, I was just discussing with my friend Colonel Hussain here just before this started. There is a particular feature near Kargil that is point 13620. That is the name. That is it's known by its height. That it's a very strategic feature because it overlooks the Kargil town and the Kargil headquarters. This was captured by us in 1947, or rather, we had thrown the enemy beyond that in 1947, but the ceasefire line, when it came up, this had gone back to Pakistan. In 1965, the war began actually in August, but in May of 1965, there were some Pakistanis who were sitting on this feature and they used to keep taking pot shots at the Kargil camp. So an operation was launched in May 65, much before the war, to capture this. The story of that is also there in the book. So this feature was captured in May of 1965, and in June it was handed over back to Pakistan under a UN negotiated agreement. And again, when the war started again in August, it was captured again at a cost of life and limb. And at the end of the war, again it was given back. In 1971, this feature was captured yet again for the fourth time. And this time we kept it. This time we didn't give it back. So now it is still and during the Kargil war it was there. So I would say that these are political decisions, one would not be privy to the exact nature of the compulsions. But what I would assume is that 65, firstly, why we stopped fighting? It was international pressure basically. The US, the UK, China and United Nations, they were all, and India was probably not as self-reliant and as confident of its strength at that point of time. The Prime Minister, though he played a remarkable role, he was a very new Prime Minister. Lal Bahadur Nehru had died in 64. Lal Bahadur Shastri had taken over in 1964, and in 65 the war started. And he did not probably have that international stature that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru had. These are all speculation, not that he was any lesser. But yes, we gave it up, but it was a clean exchange. So while we gave up Haji Pir, they were sitting in Khemkaran. I showed you that small red area in Punjab. They were sitting there inside Indian territory, and they were sitting in Chham. Now, Chham was a very dangerous area for us to have under Pakistani control, because it was threatening the main artery, that is the Jammu-Srinagar road. And sitting there, the Pakistanis could really play a lot of mischief for us. So probably that was one factor which was weighing on their mind. So that is, I hope that answers the question.
So one small question. With all the salutations, and we feel proud about the Indian Army. But when we talk about the wars with Pakistan in 48, 65 or even in Kargil war in 71, I think the design of the enemy was the same. It started, this 48, 65 and Kargil war started with infiltration, and then they turned that they were Mujahideens, but ultimately it was the army. And like you said, in 65 also we had the Shepherd boys who went to that side and came to know that there's some infiltration happening there, and it repeated in Kargil war also. There were some Ladakhi scouts who found this. Overall, what have we learned from 1948 to Kargil war, that these people keep on infiltrating and we come to know through shepherds only? Or local people, is there some lacking in intelligentsia or something? I don't know, because this is a layman, we wonder all this.
It's a very fair question, very good question. See, I wonder if you've been to those areas, if you've seen the terrain.
I belong to J&K. So.
Okay, so which part of JNK do you belong
I'm
to?
from Srinagar.
Okay.
But in 65, I was in 5th primary.
Okay.
So I knew
you were-
about
you're a-
Haji Pir and Kuala Bridge
Right,
and something
right.
we were talking about.
Right.
Then I read a lot about the wars from Pakistan point of view also, where they say that even the battle tanks, when they entered the Indian area, most of the people who were in the tanks from Pakistan side, they left it and ran back to their area. Why? Because they did not want to die and be cremated here. They wanted to go back. That's what they say. But when we talk about our intelligence, we see always these lacks happen.
Right. So, since you are from that area and you've seen these areas, you would appreciate how difficult, or I would say impossible, it is to hold it all across. You see, you can't hold every inch. So, I mean, firstly, it's a issue of manpower. You can't really string your man, and tactically also that is not a sound thing to do. So that was the case in 65. So you hold important areas, and there are certain areas, there are gaps from where infiltration can and does happen. To counter that, the army regularly patrols these areas. They send out people periodically, once a week, once in 10 days, once in 15 days, to take a round and see if there are any tracks or this thing. So that was the situation in 65. Now what we have learned is today we have a border fence. So, I mean, to a large extent, that situation has been checked. In some of these rugged areas, it's not even possible to construct a fence. I mean, how do you construct a fence on such a mountain like 13620? It's impossible to construct a fence there. We are also using a lot of technology now. We have ground-based sensors. But again, I mean, you can't just deploy them across the entire border.
That's correct. See, what we did at Sechin, I think, as per my little knowledge, we repeated what they used to do with us. So they went down and we went up and we captured it. So we should do these things frequently to teach them a lesson. Otherwise, we are always on the receiving end.
So Siachen was one example. You're right, but you know the cost of maintaining Siachen every day in terms of money, in terms of lives. We can't do it everywhere. Siachen was strategically very important, and we were making a point, and even to date, because we made that point at every talk, at every dialogue. Pakistan starts with Siachen and they says that let's first, vacate Siachen and then. So we made that point. But again, you see, it's a matter of resources, it's a matter of feasibility.
My second point is, has army been not successful in making these politicians understand that after every war, you do certain mistakes when you go on the negotiation table. Like returning Haji Pir, I think, was a big disaster. Or 1971, when you had an opportunity to solve about the problem of Kashmir after having their people under you still failed again.
I just read out that. You see, fortunately, we have an army which does its job.
That's what I said, advisor section.
Yes, I'm sure the advice is given. Whether it is taken or not is another issue. Thank you.
The third one, this book, are these stories as short as you read, or you have elaborated?
Yeah, so the average length is about 3,000 words, 3,000 to 4,000 words per story.
Okay. Thanks.
Though it does give the background of the war and all. So initially I have given the background. So I have read from between. But what I tried to say in the presentation, that has been given there.
I have a question, sir. Are we in for a war? As bluntly as I can put it.
That is, I don't think that is a question that even the Chief of Army Staff can answer with any degree of assurance. So, our Army's credo is always to keep your powder dry, keep yourself trained, keep yourself ready. When it happens, you don't know. It almost happened in 2002.
I think in the highest traditions of an army man or a serviceman, you've answered, because right in the beginning he said that the Indian Army, Indian Defence Forces are political. So I think that, and he's not in any position to give you the mentality of Mr. Narendra Modi. Thank you so much for such a wonderful session, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Rohit Agarwal, who's just read out extracts from his fourth book, Brave Men of War. And what lovely insights, Colonel. Really, once more, congratulations and thanks for giving us so much of information. You know, something like you said about Major Bhaskar Roy being saved by a cigarette lighter. And then Jarnail Singh singing his way, morals to death. I mean, the great, great moments of the 1965 war, I think, which as a layman, no one of us would even, come to know through years. So thanks a lot. And of course, another thing which you highlighted was the stalemate that happened on the 23rd of September 1965. Am I right, sir? Thank you once more, Colonel, and I hope your book goes well. And we have the opportunity to have more books from you and more insights into the army. Thank you so much.
Well done, good. Thank you.